Okay, real quick before we get started, I'm breaking my own rules here. I'm placing a spoiler at the very beginning of the video instead of just before the narrative section for two reasons. One, after the spoiler happens, it's present for the rest of the entire game and I cannot hide it, so it massively limits footage. And two, the game's been out for years and the spoilers in the God of War Ragnarok trailers, so whatever. So if you're cool with that, 3, 2, 1, Kratos gets back the Blades of Chaos. Okay? Okay, cool. Also, the entire script was rewritten after the second playthrough. Okay, let's go! God of War goes above and beyond in terms of rewarding good gameplay decisions from the get-go, rewarding you for exploring areas or certain mechanics that the game has yet to actually announce or explain to you yet. What seems like an empty vista or a vantage point will usually have something hidden, like a sacrificial urn or one of Odin's ravens. In the best circumstances, finding these rewards may lead to others, such as an urn falling beside a chest that you might have missed. It seems like every hole in a wall is hiding something of use. Parts of the game can feel like a waste of time though, not because you aren't rewarded, just because it takes so long to get there sometimes. Kratos' running speed isn't the greatest, and there are times where you're just required to run or paddle to a location with no other way of traversing and not a whole lot to occupy you on the way there. The fast travel system could compensate for this, but it is limited to one location, one way, for half of the entire game, and even after it isn't, you can only travel to and from very select locations. God of War has all the basic hallmarks of good level design, a clear visual design language that informs the player of where to go and what the environment can be interacted with, multiple different types of terrain to mix things up and add verticality, shimmying, climbing, jumping, methods of traversal that evolve and open up in accordance to the progression of the player, so on and so forth. Nothing really seems outstanding, but nearly everything the game does is polished to a T. The entire world, as well as the game at large, is loosely adapted from Norse mythology, taking place over the 9 realms and centering on Midgard. Each realm is distinct in its feel, looks and mechanics, and variances in enemy types, lore, obstacles, and passive environmental hazards. In the base game, the only 3 realms that you can't visit are Asgard, Vanaheim, and Svartalheim. Even the fast travel system is given relevance in the world with its own level. Stepping into the fast travel gate will see you transported into the space between realms, running along the branches of Yggdrasil, the World Tree. With the lore reason for the fast travel being that you can run along the branches until you find the one that touches the world in the place that you need. Lastly, the world, or at least the lake at the center of it, expands and evolves as you do, or more accurately, recedes. As you progress, the world serpent will move and remove more of itself from the lake. Doing so causes the waters to recede and more islands are opened up for exploration. The glitches in the game essentially boil down to some very minor animation errors and what I'll generously call collision glitches. The collision glitches occur with 2 things predominantly: Atreus arrows and the Leviathan axe. You can command Atreus to shoot relevant targets like enemies or crystals regardless of whether or not Atreus actually has line of sight on the target 90% of the time. And I say 90% of the time because it really is it happens every time except for when it doesn't situation. Sometimes he just arbitrarily can't shoot through a given boulder or a wall, and other times he can, and I just cannot give you a rhyme or reason as to why. The issue with the axe occurs first whenever you call it back to you, as it will always come back to your hand no matter what or how far is between you and it. Although, more egregiously and hilariously, it happens when you gain the ability to throw it and you have it home in on a target that you've marked. The axe just does not give a single crap where the enemy is, and will not only go through whatever distance is necessary, but will also follow enemies that have gone underground to escape you. The reason that I hesitate to call the collision issues glitches is because they also have a good reason to function that way, and for the most part it's for the sake of the game's flow. Having these compromises ensures that the game runs smoothly without severe interruptions when Atreus can't perform necessary actions for either traversal or combat, or at times where the axe would just be completely lost or useless to you. It might break the immersion a bit, but overall it is to the benefit of the gameplay that they function as such, so it's not really a negative. The catalyst for God of War's story sees Kratos as a grizzled, cynical man who has just lost his wife and must now bring her ashes to the highest peak in the land along with their son at her request. Atreus is an 11-year-old boy who has been trained as a tracker and a hunter from a very young age by his mother, while also suffering from a mysterious illness that would leave him feverish if not bedridden on occasion. The bulk of the story follows Kratos as he does everything and anything he can to leave his bloody, violent rage-filled past behind him in order to live a more peaceful life away from gods and death with his son. However, we see him as he struggles with his true nature as a god that seemingly keeps putting them in danger, his past as the upstart Greek god of war, as it slowly becomes apparent that the reality of his past is unavoidably going to be revealed to those around him, whether he wants it to be or not. And on top of that, being a newly single father whose lack of skills with any sort of personal connection or parenting or relationships in general lead to frequent and escalating problems with Atreus, but as the game progresses, it becomes very apparent to the player that this isn't Kratos' story anymore. It's Atreus's. I would argue that the focal point of the story, overarching narrative aside, is Atreus' character arc as he learns to accept who he is and who his father are as both beings and as people. Unlike his mother, Kratos is harsh, blunt, demanding, and unwilling to entertain his youth. Kratos is quick to remind Atreus that he isn't ready for the realities and the dangers of the journey that they're undertaking, and thanks to Kratos' efforts, Atreus also has no idea that he or his father are gods, and likewise he has been taught from birth that gods are practically the worst thing ever in existence, which, needless to say, causes some severe complications with time as he grows and learns more about his true nature. The main story aside, the side cast of characters, from the villains to the plot MacGuffins, are all distinct in their personalities and relevance. Perhaps the most important of which is Mimir, the self-proclaimed smartest man alive, which most of the time is reasonably accurate. He's the reason why the long boat rides can be so easily forgiven, at least if you appreciate the game's story. Mimir will expand on the lore of the world by telling Atreus stories and answering questions in the game's downtime, and it seems that the writers, or at least whoever was in charge of Mimir's tales in the boat, deliberately programmed him with good storytelling in mind. Whenever you beach a boat, Mimir will stop telling his tale, but only after he's reached a decent stopping point. This usually occurs within moments of hitting the beach, but there are rare times that Mimir will continue the story for another few sentences in order to wrap up whatever point was being discussed. Whenever you return to the boat, Mimir will usually be prompted by Atreus, who seems to also have lines regarding every single story that Mimir can tell, reminding him where they let off and restarting the dialogue until the relevant story is completed. This particularly deserves mention because the devs have somehow found a way to make exposition dynamic, relevant, and also somehow believably fluid, despite the fact that the player can potentially just cut it off at any time. The game's primary mechanics are split between Kratos and Atreus. For Kratos, the ice magic of the Leviathan axe functions both as a nice Nordic flavor as well as a very helpful early boon in combat. Rather than dealing more damage, the axe can freeze and slow enemies, which makes them easier to handle. Later on, the Blades of Chaos act as both crowd control weapons and a stronger, raw damage dealer because their fire magic will build and deal damage over time. These are essential to use in certain areas of the game, most notably the entire region of Helheim, wherein the frozen damned are immune to the frost damage of the axe. Likewise, they also gain the ability to channel the winds of hell once Brock gets a hold of them, and this becomes another traversal and puzzle mechanic that the axe just can't help you with. In terms of Atreus, he gains the ability to use 3 different kinds of magical arrows, 2 of which become primary mechanics of the game's progression. The light arrows can be fired at enemies to build up stun, allowing Kratos to do a finisher, or be fired at crystals from Alfheim, creating a bridge of light that spans gaps and allows access to yet unexplorable areas. The shock arrows can paralyze enemies, holding them in place long enough for Kratos to land a strong blow, start a combo, or gain some distance, and can also be used to overcharge the dried sap of Yggdrasil. When Atreus shoots the sap, they begin to overload with power and will detonate an explosion that destroys everything nearby. The reason why I'm just explaining the function of the mechanics is because nearly everything that you can do has a split application between combat and exploration, whereas most games seem to shower you in abilities that are one-dimensional in their use case. This system creates, Metroidvania-esque. Wow, I cannot get away from Metroidvania influence design. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's a system that encourages backtracking to places where you found items or paths that couldn't be accessed before thanks to not having the necessary ability. The combat both seems inspired and inspiring, which sounds incredibly pretentious on paper, so please hear me out. The takedowns feel very reminiscent of the glory kills from Doom 2016, and a friendly reminder that this game originally came out in 2018. I remember reeling back the first few times I landed them just because they seemed so violent and visceral that it almost felt out of place until I remembered, Oh yeah, I'm playing God of War. In terms of inspiring, the combat system in terms of alerting the player to oncoming attacks feels reminiscent to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, a game that came out after God of War in 2019. Specifically, whenever an enemy attack is highlighted in red, that attack is unblockable and impossible to parry, so your only option is to dodge or do something creative. Sekiro expanded upon and refined this concept, but until I checked the release dates, I actually just assumed that this game borrowed the idea from Sekiro. The only negatives, of which there are only few, is that there isn't really incentive to expand your combat skills outside of making the combat easier with more damage. The expanded combo potential, crowd control, and precision projectile combat aren't explicitly necessary for your ability to beat enemies or bosses, and the game isn't so hard to get through with just button mashing so long as you can master parrying. Yes, doing so makes you feel more powerful by dealing more damage in more impressive and flashy ways, but like I said, it isn't truly necessary, and I'm afraid that some players are going to miss out on this content just because they might feel like it's overcomplicated for no reason. The game visually has a flair for the cinematic, and graphically looks fantastic. As mentioned in the level design portion, the game also has a consistent visual identity when it comes to informing the player about where they need to go, but also puts in new elements to indicate your status in combat. There are 5 different kinds of threat indicators, 3 of which come in the form of arrows that appear around Kratos to indicate enemies that are out of his line of sight, and 2 of which are circles that indicate different kinds of attacks that you can see. In terms of the arrows, the 3 flavors indicate enemy positions, an enemy who is attacking, and the direction of an incoming projectile. These markers help to inform the player about the state of the battle, especially considering that the point of view now holds a consistent third-person distance rather than showing most of the entire room like in previous God of Wars. The biggest disappointment, potentially of the entire game though, also lies in the visual presentation, because several enemies and upgrades end up being the same model, sometimes with a different color. Most of the trolls that serve as several of the game's mini-bosses also look identical to one another, with some minor changes to color and markings. And Kratos will also kill almost all of them in the exact same way every single time. The ogres have the exact same problem, but they're a little more forgivable just because their takedown at least also functions as an additional combat mechanic. Less forgivable, though, are the ancients. On 2 different occasions, Atreus makes this big deal about meeting one, only for them to have the exact same attacks, weaknesses, mechanics, and designs with, again, a minor change to colors and markings and maybe their elemental damage type. At the very least, the Soul Eaters and Soul Devourers could have done something to appear more dangerous, but no, really, this Stone Ancient looks exactly and behaves exactly like the rest of the ones you killed up to this point, but no, it's just so much more dangerous, and he'll eat your soul if he gets you, and then it's really over. No afterlife, no nothing, Atreus insists to the man who single-handedly ended the entire Greek afterlife. But in terms of good sound design, 2 things stand out in memory: the ravens and the combination of Atreus and Mimir. Destroying all of Odin's ravens is one of the big passive goals as you go throughout the game, and they have a very unique sound set that doesn't sound like anything else in the entire game. There's often times where they're hidden away in ways that make them hard to visually locate, and that sound effect set for the ravens is what allows the player to locate most of them, and it's what allows this game-long side quest to function at all. Atreus and Mimir, on the other hand, can be essential to combat, breaking you out of your tunnel vision if you're getting overwhelmed. Atreus in particular will often comment when new enemies enter the fray, a large attack is incoming, or when a projectile is incoming, and the voice acting puts a lot of emotion and desperation into the mix, which makes a lot of sense considering that, again, in context, Atreus is an 11-year-old boy who is trying to do his best to keep both himself and his father alive. Where the sound design falls flat, however, is with Brok and Sindri. Not because of bad acting, bad recordings, bad sound effects, or anything like that, but just very simply because of when and how often certain lines come up. There are multiple sub-quests that you can go on for the 2 of them, which spark particular dialogue relating to the given quest. However, they will also never stop saying that line sparked by the given quest. Hearing them constantly ask me questions about if I have found the thing they asked me for, or telling me to be more careful when handling the loot that they asked me to go find, makes me want to go find those things less and less and less in a reverse psychology sort of way, and it feels almost as though the player is being punished, in a sense, for not going after and doing their side quests immediately after getting them. What's worse is that this problem isn't at all difficult to solve. The two almost universally have a forge set up at the entrance of whatever area is relevant to the side quest, making it so that they only speak those lines once when they give you the quest, and then again once you've entered the area that the quest is for, would both make it less annoying, more realistic, and believable. But since they didn't, why yes, Brock, I did eventually scare up that alchemist what needed finding. He's in this ring. Maybe you should join him. Wow, this has been a long time coming, and dude, this game is good. Like, if you're a sucker for good character writing and you like games for the narrative, this is definitely one you're gonna probably like. Definitely, probably. I didn't really know what to expect going in, what with the whole, like, changing of the whole mythos and, like, the setting and everything, but now that I played it through twice, I gotta say, just play it. Opinion-wise, it's up there, 10 out of 10 from me. It's up with Metroid Dread for me, so if that's your endorsement that you need, go nuts, but it's up there with confidence. I realize now that I was getting really, really hard capped by my hardware before, and after building a new PC, I had to completely rewrite the whole review because so much of the score changed. And now it's so good. It sounds great. It looks incredible. The writing's good. It plays good. I just think it's good. Honestly, I mean, it's a great sign when everything I feel like I can criticize feels like a nitpick. But is it perfect? No, but enough about what I think. Is the game actually good? I'm not dead, I swear. I know my schedule has been really inconsistent, but so has my life, so here we are. Personally, I can't wait for more God of War. I really enjoyed this game, and now I'm really looking forward to Ragnarok picking up where this one left off and eventually reviewing it. I say eventually because I have no idea at this point when it's coming to PC, and I don't own a PlayStation. But in the meantime, I've been LoneWolfEX. Remember to subscribe for more, and I will see you all next time.